Good afternoon. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to just talk about our Tpack framework, the article that we read by Kohler and Mishra. In this article sort of develops a framework for the course and talking about why we should be using technology in our classroom, how we should be using technology in our classroom, really when and why we should be using technology in our classroom. So what is the purpose of Tpack? As I just said, to provide that framework for integrating technology to support instruction and improve student learning. The article starts off, and I think that this is an important point that they make about the difficulty, and I know that's on a sliding scale for teachers as it relates to integrating technology, and it has to do, they would argue, with the specificity, transparency, and stability of traditional analog technologies like a pencil or an overhead projector that I had in my classroom. That overhead projector had a very specific purpose for projecting instruction, me writing on it or having transparencies to place down on it. It was transparent. If something went wrong with that overhead, it was generally one thing, and that was that the bulb was blown out on it. And it was stable. I'm sure that we could walk into some storeroom somewhere and find a projector, and it still looks the same as it did, when I was using them, 20 years ago. Whereas digital technologies like the cell phone that we see on the screen there, it can be used in many different ways. It's protean, as they describe it, and it's a calculator, it's a phone, it's access to the internet, it's a video or audio recorder. They're unstable. That phone looks nothing like the phone that I received when I first signed up for a mobile phone contract, a little teeny Nokia cell phone, and all you could do on it was make a phone call. They're opaque. Right, so I know how this pencil works, and I know how that projector works. I know, what is involved in its functioning. Whereas I have very little, if any, understanding about what's going on in that computer, and therefore, when it's not working, it makes it difficult one to use. But not only that, it makes me reluctant to use it because if something goes wrong, I may not know how to fix that. As the work of Kohler and Mishra was built on work that Schulman did in '87, along with his wife, Schulman and Schulman, on pedagogy and content knowledge, and how we want to align the instructional methodology that we're using with the content that we're teaching. For example, when we're teaching math to a certain population of students, we know that it's best practice pedagogically to use manipulatives to teach that content. So with the addition of Tpack, we have this new framework, this Venn diagram with 7 different components. And the one I tend to focus on is this one right here in the center, which is where they all meet. Not technology and pedagogy, not pedagogy and content knowledge, but where technology, pedagogy, and content knowledge all come together to work together to achieve our goals. So of each of those 7 components, the first is content knowledge. We know what that is. Hopefully we have a sound understanding of content knowledge, what our content knowledge is that we need to teach our subject or subjects. Technology knowledge is a little more difficult because, as we saw at the beginning there, one is just that it's rapidly changing, right? I've been teaching apps for a minimum of 7 years, probably longer, and there are hundreds of them each year that are introduced to education, and there are dozens of them that are no longer available for various reasons each year. So keeping up with that, if we're teaching chemistry, that content knowledge is not changing a lot, whereas the technology knowledge that we may need is. So what we want to know as it relates to technology knowledge is sort of these 3 levels that Davey introduces. First, in order to technologically literate as it relates to instructional technologies in our classroom is we need to be aware of them, right? We have to know that that particular technology is available before we can do anything. But once we are aware of it, we need to develop what Davies calls praxis, which is we need to learn how to use that technology, right? Just as if we got a new microscope in our classroom as a biology teacher, first thing we'd need to do is familiarize ourselves with how that tool works, or a new graphing calculator, which again are both technologies, but we tend not to maybe think about the microscope as much as a technology as we do the graphing calculator. With that said, the next stage is the phronesis stage, where we're going to we're aware, we've learned how to use it. Now we can think as teachers, we can think about, okay, now when do I want to use this, and why do I want to use this? When am I going to use this technology, and more importantly, why am I going to use this technology in my classroom? Pedagogical content knowledge, again, is back to sort of that original framework by Schulman, is aligning our pedagogy with what we're teaching. As a former English teacher, an example of that would be when I'm teaching writing. And we know that brainstorming, outlining, peer editing, writing portfolios, all those things are sound pedagogical strategies for teaching writing. Technology content knowledge, one of the things they talk about this is how technology can influence what we're teaching, right? And a couple examples of that might be cursive, teaching cursive, and teaching typing, right? Schulman and Mishra in their paper use some different examples, but for a while we quit teaching cursive. We're not really teaching typing anymore. We teach keyboarding, but it's a very short amount of time that we do that. And I think we could make an argument that technology has had an impact on that, right? That we don't necessarily need those skills because we tend to word process so much. And as it relates to typing, you don't have to be as adept at typing per se, because if you make mistakes, they're easy to correct, whereas they were not if you've ever used a typewriter. So a good example of technology and pedagogy would be these geoboards, right? So we have an analog geoboard, this one with the rubber bands, and then we have a digital geoboard that you would use on, say, an iPad, where students could take these virtual rubber bands and create geometric shapes with it. What's the difference, you may say? And this is kind of a nice connection to SAMR that you're going to read about this week. The difference is that the geoboard, the digital one, you can use anywhere, right? And you're never going to lose the rubber bands. Those are not perishables. You don't have to worry about them getting flipped across the classroom. So there are some benefits as it relates to that. So how does technology influence pedagogy in a room? Well, if we look at this room, the technology, we could pick several things. The one I'm focusing on is the blackboard, though, right? So the blackboard was a technology revolutionary when it was introduced in the 19th century. And this, as you can see from the organization of the desk, this technology says that all the instruction is at the front of the room, right? It's dictating the pedagogy, right? The teaching is going to be the instruction is going to be teacher-centered because of this technology that was introduced. Okay, and so that is really kind of all of it. I'm running a little bit out of time, so I won't go into the wiki and how that particular technology supports all of them, but hopefully this gives you a little idea of what Mishra and Kohler were talking about in their article about Tpack.